Hello, this is the interview of Katherine and Stephenson, better known to all of us as Kate. This is part of the Legal History Project of the National Bar Association. Today is Tuesday, February the 15th, 2022, and we are at the National Bar Association offices. And I'm Mary Burrs, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Kate today. Hello, Kate. How are you?
Hi, Mary. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. I want to start out by asking you some questions, just some background questions about yourself, or when and where you were born and where you grew up.
I was born in Knoxville, Tennessee. And my father was a corporate gypsy. He worked for Alcoa back in the days when companies could move people around whenever they wanted to. So we went from Knoxville to Messina, New York, which is up on the St. Lawrence, lots of snow. And we went from there to the Gulf Coast of Texas.
What a change.
Yes, indeed. And then from there to Pittsburgh, where Alcoa's corporate headquarters were. And so that's where we lived until I went home.
And so that was quite an odyssey that you and your family had during your growing up years.
Some people note that I don't have an accent, and I think that's why.
But now, where did you go to high school?
I went to high school in Pittsburgh. I was really fortunate. My mother's mother wanted me to go to a private school there, so I went to public school until high school, and I went to a private girls' high school in Pittsburgh.
Did you have any special interests in high school?
I loved everything in high school.
Did you?
Yeah, English, math, history, science. I had struggled with a little bit, but the others were all.
Did you like to read?
I love to read. I've always loved to read.
Any particular type of literature or everything? Everything.
I mean, when I was my first books I remember were Nancy Drew and the Bobbsey Twins.
Oh, I remember the Bobbsey Twins, of course. That was my favorite, my first favorite series, the Bobbsey Twins. So you were omnivorous when it came to reading.
I was indeed. Yes.
And then college, where did you go to college?
I went to Kenyon College in Ohio. It's a small liberal arts school that now has a really great reputation. I'm one of those people who could never get in if I were to apply again because it's become so much more selective. But it was a great fit for me. It was a hard liberal arts school, but a small community that I was able to fit into very comfortably.
I'm sure you discovered scholarship and probably met people who truly were scholars when you were in college.
I did, and I did well in college. I had some wonderful professors who taught me a lot and mentored me, and made some good friends.
What did you major in?
I majored in philosophy.
That's a true foundational major, isn't it?
Well, I just thought it would be interesting to think. I thought it might be easier studying. All I had to do was just sit and think, but it turned out to be much more difficult than I thought it was going to be.
Thinking's hard work.
It is.
Were there any activities that you enjoyed while you were in college?
I started horseback riding when I was in college, which was a lot of fun to learn how to do. And I stuck with that for several years after I finished my education. When I was teaching school, I was still horseback riding once a week. So that was really great. I also discovered photography when I was in college, and I worked as a photographer for the public relations department for a couple of years.
What types of photography did you do for public relations?
It was mostly documentary. The speakers coming to town, I'm going to take pictures of the speaker or college life or whatever. It gave me an excuse to walk into a room and belong, even though I didn't really feel like I did. I could hide behind the camera. That was really a good way to do things for me.
That's a wonderful activity to have. And you're right, it allows you to go into all kinds of places. The camera leads you, doesn't it?
Yes, it was my ticket.
It was your ticket.
And it ran interference for me.
Anything else that you did while you were in college?
Oh gosh, Mary, that was so long ago.
Oh my, I'm so sorry. Did you do anything in terms of public broadcasting?
I did. During my vacations, I started when I was in high school during vacations working for WQED, which was a public broadcasting station in Pittsburgh. And I continued working for them when I was in college, and even through my first year of graduate school, I continued to work for WQED during my vacations and so on.
What kinds of things did you do?
I did, when I very first started, I addressed mailings to fundraising mailings, but I ended up being a production assistant and then an assistant director, which really are fancy names for being the one who is responsible for making sure that everything is where it's supposed to be when it's supposed to be there, including the actors.
What an interesting early life you had, and not just growing up, but also in college. Interesting things you chose to be involved in.
I was lucky. These things all kind of fell in my lap.
Sometimes those are the best, aren't they?
You may remember that Jeannie Nelson spoke at the LAW breakfast a long time ago. And I remember her saying one of her rules was always to take the open door.
I'm glad you did.
Yeah, so that's what that's what my life seems to be all about. It's just, okay, there's an open door. I think I'll take that one.
You never know. There are more open doors to come. And you never know where they will go. But after college, did you do any post-grad work?
I did. I went to graduate school at University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill in history. I had discovered too late when I was at college that I loved history, too late to major in history, but decided that I wanted to continue studying it. So I went to graduate school and got a master's degree in American women's history.
I was going to ask you what area of history you focused on. And did you do a thesis?
Well, of course I did a thesis.
Of course you did.
And of course I took the easiest thing I could find to do. My thesis was about women novelists in the 19th century, whom Hawthorne called a damn pack of scribbling women, because he didn't like them because they outsold him.
Yes.
And they were basically, these novels were basically the soap operas of their day. And my thesis ended up actually comparing the novels to what was then modern day soap operas, and just trying to figure out what it was that drew people to read those.
I bet you found some common themes, didn't you?
There were common themes. It reflects the culture, and it also reflects the drama that people want to find in their lives.
Well, it probably also reflects the experiences that women were having that were the same in the 19th century as they were to be in the 20th century.
Family was always central to women in both areas, and love. They always wanted to be loved, but who doesn't?
Interesting involvements of your thinking in these. So you got a master's degree in history, and then what happened?
Well, then I thought it's time I need to get some gainful employment. And I went to work for a little while for a small production company in Pittsburgh. But it was freelance work, and I wasn't sure where the future was to that. So then my grandparents, who lived in Knoxville, suggested that I come down there and see if I could get a job teaching at Webb School in Knoxville. So I did, and taught at Webb for 4 years, taught history. History.
Yeah. And that is a secondary school.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I taught in the upper school.
Okay. It's both lower and upper. Okay. Did you enjoy teaching?
I enjoyed it, but I wasn't very good at it, I don't think. I mean, I was only 6 years older than the senior boys that I taught, and they kind of pushed me around a little bit. And I didn't quite know how to control them, how to stand my ground. I learned a lot about how to do that, but I felt like I was incompetent. When the teenagers didn't act like the adults I expected them to act like, I'd get very upset. I didn't understand teenagers, even though I'd only recently been one myself. So I just didn't feel like I was very good at it. And so after 4 years, I started looking around to see if I could figure out something else to do.
Sometimes I think that we all start out feeling incompetent, and probably we are as we first start. But I think that something like teaching, for example, you just have to become seasoned in it. And that just takes time. And
Yes, and you have to be dedicated enough to be willing to go through the difficult parts of it, which include the terrible pay and the
yes,
long hours.
yes, that's true. It has to be more dedication than what you're compensated for, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How about the summers during those
In
years?
the summers, I worked at a camp in the mountains of North Carolina.
What
It
did you
was-
do?
Well, I started out teaching writing because I was still writing at the time. And then I ended up I was head counselor for a year, and then I spent a couple of years just doing administrative stuff, and I did the photography for the camp. So I just got to be outdoors, which I had never realized.
This is the
how
best of all
wonderful it
worlds,
was.
isn't
I
it?
never realized how wonderful it was to be outdoors all the time,
Oh, in North Carolina, what a beautiful place. Up in the mountains?
up in the mountains.
Oh, what a wonderful way to spend a summer.
Yeah, my sister had been there for many years, so I followed her there. And the great thing about it was that she and I got very close.
Yes.
We became really good friends, being able to be there together.
Aren't those wonderful memories to
Yeah.
have?
Yeah.
Oh, my. At some point, you took an interesting change, or you went in a different vector in your life that took you to law school. How did that come about?
It was unexpected. There were no lawyers in my family growing up. I had never thought that I wanted to be a lawyer. It never occurred to me to be a lawyer. But I was tired of teaching. I wanted to do something else. So I went to a woman I really respected, who was the fine arts teacher at the school. And I asked her to help me write my resume. And she said, no.
That's
No.
a simple answer.
She said, I want you to apply to law school. And it had never occurred to me to do that. And I resisted it because I didn't want to go back to school. I wanted to be employed. But she said, no, you really need to go to law school. You think like a lawyer, and I think you would fit in really well there. So I thought, all right, to humor her, I took the LSAT. And I aced the LSAT. And I have to say, during about the last hour of the LSAT, I had a terrible headache, and I was so tired that I think I guessed at every single question, and I still aced it. So that's my technique from now on.
To guess.
To guess. So apparently guessing worked for me. And then I had to go to law school.
Well, and sometimes I think it's not truly guessing. It might not be as focused or conscious a decision for each answer, but nevertheless that there is a sense of what the right answer would be. I'm trying to be charitable about this.
Yes, let's be charitable about it.
And so where did you decide to go to law school?
UT offered me a full scholarship, and I didn't have to pay to move anywhere.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I was late applying to law schools. They had already made their admissions decisions. I can't remember whether I got in anywhere else. I think I might have. But with the full scholarship from UT and not having to pay to move anywhere, I thought, I'll just go here.
That was an open door, wasn't it?
That was an open door. Yeah.
Did you ever go back and talk to that wonderful person at the school in the fine arts?
I did, and let her know that unfortunately she died a few years later.
I'm sorry.
So I never got to keep in touch with her and let her know where things ended up.
She really was quite perceptive.
Yes.
So
indeed she
what
was.
a wonderful decision that was.
As I
by
said, she's
itself.
one of the wisest people I ever.
Yes, she certainly gave you a gift, didn't she? Yes, that keeps on giving. Well, law school, how was that for you?
I really liked law school. So many of my classmates didn't, but I really loved it. I loved the puzzle part of putting different pieces of the law together and seeing how different sections of the statutes fit together. I'm really good at memorizing. And so that course was something that was prized in law school. I was very good at that. I was not good. I felt incompetent a lot of the time because I was not good at thinking on my feet. And my classmates who were able to have off the cuff, brilliant discussions about some aspect of the law or the moral implications of this or that really amazed me. And but I couldn't do it myself. I could memorize. That was my talent.
But nevertheless, I think we all admire people who can just start to talk and be articulate without a note in front of them. But we all start someplace, and that's a wonderful start. Any professors at UT that stand out in your mind that you remember in particular?
Well, let's see. In sort of a backwards way, there's one professor who sticks out, and he was a civil procedure professor, and I think I might have taken con law from him as well. And he imagined himself to be, I think, a paper chase kind of professor who would ask questions that students, and he thought he could, he thought he could back them into a corner and teach them something. And I guess in a way he did. Yeah, he did, because he asked me a question one day, a couple months into class, and I didn't know the answer. And then he asked me another question. I didn't know the answer to that question either, and I felt humiliated. I walked out of that class and I said, I am never going to let him do that to me again. And so after that, I started reading my cases very carefully. I underlined with color coding in my case books. I briefed the cases with color coding, and I made sure that anytime he asked me a question from me, I know the answer to the question.
You became a true student,
I guess,
of that course, didn't you?
Yeah.
And
that taught me, that stood me well, obviously.
Yes.
Law school.
Yes, and in law school, you graduated #1 in your class,
I
didn't
was
you?
first in my class. Yes.
And you were valedictorian
Yes.
of your class. That's quite a distinction. What other activities? Law school by itself is one gigantic activity, but were there any activities during law school that you remember, perhaps with fondness or maybe not fondness?
During my second year, I was on the National Moot Court team, which UT takes very seriously. I was the only second-year student on the team. The other two students on the team were third-year students. I could barely get my name out during the first practice argument that we had. But I learned a lot very quickly about how to make an oral argument. We worked hard on the brief, and we ended up making it to the quarterfinals in the nation. We went to New York.
That's quite a distinction.
For the Nationals.
I remember a law professor saying to us in our first year of law school that law school is going to change us. That we'll be very different people when we finish this experience from what we were when we started out. Did you find that to be true?
Oh, I think undoubtedly. I mean, I was older when I started law school, older than most of the people in my class. So I already had a kind of a different way of looking at the world than they did. But I certainly felt by the time law school was over, much more confident about myself and much more able to hold my own in a conversation, and much more aware of when I didn't know the answer and should just shut my mouth.
That's a skill by itself, isn't it? To know when to be silent. Lawyers have such a hard time with that, I think. This one does over here. Had you given any thought while you were in law school as to what you wanted to do in the practice of law? What area you wanted to work in?
I liked the estate planning class I took, mostly because of the great stories that there were in that class. So I thought probably estate planning might be something I'd want to do. I had one professor who really encouraged me to get a judicial clerkship, but I felt that I was 30 something when I graduated, and I didn't want to have another temporary position. I probably should have taken a judicial clerkship. I think it probably would have been a good move looking back on it, but at the time I didn't want one. I didn't want to go back up north. It was too cold. I didn't want to go to Atlanta. It was too big, or stay in Knoxville. It was too small. So I came to Nashville.
Are you glad you did? Yeah, we're glad you did too.
I'm still here.
We're very glad you did, Kate. Good move. When you arrived in Nashville, did you come with a job or did you come to Nashville and then find?
I had done the great second year law student thing of interviewing on campus, and then I had probably 4 or 5 interviews in Nashville with various law firms here. And the firm I chose, Farris, Warfield, and Kanaday, because it was it had a reputation as the most progressive firm in the city.
And it certainly did. It was a well-earned reputation
Yeah.
also.
And I really and I had the opportunity to work with Jane Davis in estate
Yes.
planning at Farris.
Yes.
She was willing to take me on, and that just seemed like a great opportunity for
One
me.
more open door.
One more open
Oh,
door.
and how did your practice at Farris, Warfield, Kennedy evolve?
I worked in estate planning for several years. I found parts of it to be very difficult. The tax parts of estate planning are very complicated
Yes.
and very sophisticated. And I had a little bit of a hard time wrapping my brain around that. In the meantime, Brad McLean and Jim Martin had both asked me to help them work on briefs for cases that they had. And they liked what I did with those briefs. And so they kept coming back to me and asking me to do more. So eventually I spent more and more of my time doing litigation and less doing estate planning, and eventually just moved on over.
You have mentioned some giants already of the bar that you met at Farris Warfield. Any other remarkable lawyers that come to mind that you remember while working there?
Oh, that'll take a long time. Mary.
Oh dear.
That'll
Okay.
take a long time. Matt Sweeney became my supervising partner around about when he left the bench. I asked him if he would be my supervising partner when he came to Farris, and he said that he would. So I worked with him probably 4 years after that, 5 years after that.
That's one wonderful opportunity for a lawyer, a new lawyer, to work in a firm like that with amazing people, and who help to help you to discover an area where you felt that you could shine and make a real contribution. How long did you stay at Farris Warfield, Canada?
I was at Farris for 6 years before they split,
Ah,
which was kind of a painful thing. It
Yes.
was a painful divorce. But of course, it worked out for the best for everybody one way or another.
surely.
And the group that I went with when the firm split became Tuke and Sweeney. And I was there for 6 years, became a partner with them.
And of course, Sweeney was Matt
Was
Sweeney,
Matt Sweeney,
and Mike Yopp, is that correct?
Mike Yopp,
Yes,
and Bob Tuke.
yes. And what did you do there?
I did complex litigation. I was never first chair in those cases. I did a lot of litigation support. I was still the brief writer. I was extremely good at organizing boxes and boxes of documents before there was such a thing as electronic discovery. I was really good at organizing the discovery documents. And I also managed a couple of times to actually get into court and do a trial. I had a couple of very small slip and fall jury trials and a couple of other very brief bench trials.
But certainly the mastery of organizing a case for trial is crucial
Mhm.
to the case. And I think many people don't realize how important.
It takes
That
a team. In a complex case, it takes a team.
It does.
You've got to have different
Right.
talents. I was not the one who was talented at taking depositions, and I was never talented in court because, again, I don't think well at my feet in that regards.
You know, it's interesting. You have, in the course of our discussion thus far, you have identified areas where you have felt great strength, but areas where you felt that not quite what you wanted to do. And that by itself is significant, I think, in the practice of law. Many of us fumble through a lot before we begin to find our place of comfort where we can stand. And that's an important discovery. And it takes some time, I think, to do.
Yeah, and I think one of the pieces of advice that Matt gave me early on that I didn't follow and kind of wish that I had was to find an area that is yours, that you can become the expert on, that people will come to you for. So be the civil procedure expert in your firm, or the ethics expert in your firm, or something that you are the go-to person for, because then you've always got a place.
But that's excellent advice.
It was great advice.
That would be good advice for new lawyers today to think about as well. You stayed with Tuke, Yopp, and Sweeney for 6 years. And did you do any appellate work while you were there?
I wrote a lot of appellate briefs.
Sure.
I argued a couple of appellate cases. More of my arguments were at the chancery level. I argued a lot in chancery.
Yes, yes. We've been going through the firms that you have been working for. And I want to take a little step off that for a moment and talk about some of the other things that you were involved in during that time. You were also very much involved in the bar itself and bar activities, including the National Bar Association. Tell us about what you did with the National Bar Association.
I had a term on the board of the National Bar Association. I can't remember, 2 years.
I think they're 2-year terms. I think they're 2-year terms.
So I had a 2-year term on the board. I had served on the CLE committee. Might have served on a couple of other committees as well, but I don't specifically remember.
And also with LAW, the Lawyers Association for Women, you are very involved with LAW, and I remember you. I think the first way I came to know you was through LAW. Tell us about what you did with LAW.
I got brought into LAW very early on. The women in my firm were all active in LAW, and they made sure that I was as well. I was on the banquet committee, I think, first. And I remember going to a banquet committee meeting in a conference room in my law firm and bringing my infant son with me.
I remember that very, very well.
And he got passed around until we got to Nancy McLean, and then she wouldn't let go of it. But yes, I was very involved in LAW. I served on committees. Every year I would serve on a committee, and I moved around to various committees. I don't remember what, if any, offices I held before I became president.
But you were president during a time when there were a lot of issues involving women and involving women in the law as well. It was truly a time when things were growing and developing, and so many of the lawyers that we were so fortunate both to meet and to be influenced by were people who are amazing and giants and courageous in the practice of law and in encouraging other women
They were.
And it made a difference. I think it truly did. We were blessed to have had that experience. But I've got to say that I was one of the people waiting for Nancy to give up that baby. And how old is this child now?
This child turned 30 2 days ago.
Oh my gracious. So I guess I'll just keep on waiting. What were some of the cases that stood out or that stand out in your mind as learning experiences for you as a lawyer? Or just one case that stands out?
Well, I'm going to tell you, let me tell you about one little bitty one first. It was a slip and fall case. George Duzane was on the other side. It was the first jury trial I had ever tried all by myself. I was the only, I didn't have anybody sitting beside me whispering in my ear about what I should say and do. It was liability in these kinds of cases that I was trying was kind of a given. And so it was really damages that you were talking about. And the jury came back with a verdict. It was a plaintiff's verdict, but it was less than the amount that we had offered in settlement. And George Duzain, bless his heart, was very happy to tell anyone that, and these are his words, she cleaned my clock. And I just thought that I learned a lot trying that case all by myself. And I learned a lot from George too, in the way that he tried the case and in the way he reacted to what I did as a lawyer. So I really enjoyed that case. The other case, the case I learned the very most from ever was a terrible, horrible, awful loss. It was a products liability case being tried in rural North Carolina. It was a hosiery mill that had burned down. And if my client's product was determined to be the cause of the fire, we were going to lose a lot of money. We went into the trial, the expert witnesses and my co-counsel, I was lead counsel, my expert witnesses, my co-counsel, my client, all of us went into the trial convinced that we could not lose. We had all the evidence all lined up and everything was in our favor. And we lost. The jury ruled in favor of the plaintiff, and we lost $7 million. And I was devastated, but I learned an awful lot from my mistakes. I made mistakes in that trial.
I think you learned the power of a jury.
And I learned
Also.
the power of a jury.
They are. You begin to see how people make judgments about matters, and by the end of a trial, members of a jury, I think, are often relating very closely to someone.
Yes.
In that case,
Yeah.
It's hard to learn, but you know, sometimes an experience like that is one of the ways that you become an even better lawyer. Or you learn things from that case that you bring to whatever you bring or you do next.
Yeah, and the thing I learned about in that case, and long stories, but expert witnesses and how to handle them. That was
That's a
really key
Yes.
problem in that case.
yes, both yours and the other side's expert witness.
Right.
Let's go back and talk about some of the places that you worked again. When we left off, you had been working for Tuke, Yopp, and Sweeney, and had stayed there for 6 years. And by this time, you're about 12 years into practice.
That's right. I was 6 years at each of those firms.
Okay. And then what happened next? What did you do next?
Well, I had decided at that point, and Matt agreed with me, frankly, that I needed to get away from working so closely with Matt because he kept trying to launch me. And then 3 days later, he'd come into my office and say, "Can you help me with this?"
Sure.
And so I kept being Matt's lawyer, and I didn't want to be Matt's lawyer, and he didn't want me to be Matt's lawyer. So I needed to get away from him. And at the same time, Tuke, Yopp, and Sweeney was talking about merging with a regional firm so that I would have become a very small fish in a big pond. And I didn't want to do that. And at the same time, what is now Trauger and Tuke came to me and said, "We really need you to take on this piece of work because Jane Allen is leaving the firm and we need you to take on her work." And it just all seemed to fit at the same time. And it was like the heavens speaking to me and opening the door. So I took it and I went with Trauger and Tuke. And I'm really glad I did. It was a great move.
Good. And sometimes moves can be like that.
Yeah.
It's not something that you practiced for or that you sought out, but that evolved.
Right.
And what did you do there? What was your practice there?
Well, I took on Jane's work as an employment lawyer. One of the primary clients was MDHA, Metropolitan Development Housing Agency. I was their employment lawyer for this 10 years that I was at that firm.
You were a partner, of course.
And I was managing.
Yes.
At that firm. So I did that, and I did litigation. And the thing that was different about this firm is that when I got work in, it was my work. It wasn't. I've never been good at client development. I never brought in my own work, no matter what. Brought in some, but not very much. Mostly the work came from other lawyers in the firm. But when they handed me the work at that firm, it was my work. They didn't come back to my office 3 days later and say, so what are you doing now? And have you filed this? And are you watching out for that? And have you looked into this issue? They just left it for me to do, which was something new for me.
And you took off from there.
I did.
Mhm. And that was that. How did that feel to you? That sense that this was your case and nobody was looking over your shoulder.
A little bit scary, but also empowering.
It'd be hard, wouldn't it, to go back to any other way
Yeah,
after that experience?
Yeah.
Did you enjoy working in that firm?
I loved it. The lawyers there were, and the staff, just a great community of people.
Every lawyer there is wonderful.
Every lawyer there.
So who are some of the lawyers that you remember in particular?
Well, it's not hard to remember them because there's maybe 10 of them over the course of the 10 years I was there. But I mean, Byron Trauger is just an absolutely fabulous person, and working with him is always enlightening and educational. I learned so much from him, and yet he never told me what to do. I didn't learn from him telling me anything. But he's influential and he knows everybody. Paul Nye, a really great lawyer, great litigator. Learned a lot from him.
Sure. So many of these lawyers, it's not only what they teach you in the course of the case, but it's also their example, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There are some intangibles that you learn from working with lawyers like that, that are not just for the practice of law, but for the practice of life as well.
I remember walking down the street with Byron one day. We're going to lunch, and I'm just focused on where we're going down the street. But he stopped and turned to a couple who was walking down the street beside us, and he said, "Can I help you?" And it turned out that they were tourists from Germany who were lost and couldn't find where they were going, and he was able to point them in the right direction. I didn't even notice.
Well, how perceptive.
But that's the way Byron is.
Wow, to be so aware of what's going on,
Yeah.
Especially when you're ready for lunch.
That's where I was headed.
And you remained involved in bar activities, but you were also involved in some community activities as well, were you not?
I did. I served on some boards of directors. I wanted to do some kind of volunteer work, but I knew my world was so narrow, had always been so narrow, that I didn't think I could deal on a one-on-one basis with people who were in need of anything. But I could serve on a board of directors, that I could do. So I served on the board of directors at Monroe Harding, which took care of youth who were at risk. I served on the personnel committee at Family and Children's Services, the personnel committee of Miriam's Promise. I served on the board of directors of Humanities Tennessee and also of the Federation of State Humanities Councils, and ended up chairing 3 of those boards.
What a very full life
It was.
that is.
I met some wonderful, wonderful people on those boards.
Oh, I bet you did. It's a wonderful way. It almost completes your professional life.
Yeah.
When you work with wonderful people and you serve on a board and you can feel the sense of some movement forward somewhere that perhaps you were at least present for the creation of.
I hope I just moved things just a little bit.
Okay, a little bit, and sometimes it takes a little while to begin to see the impact that you may have had. It takes a little while to begin to see how that plays with other factors.
You just have
reflect
to
on
do
that.
every little bit.
Yes,
I-
right.
A wise person once told me, if you're waiting to change the world, you're going to be waiting a long time because you're not going to actually change the world, but you might change one person's life a little bit.
Right,
Sometimes
right.
That's
That's a wonderful piece of advice also. You, what are you doing these days? What are you doing now? And I'm asking you this because I want to see just how you moved from where you were to what you're doing now.
I left Trauger and Tuke after the economy tanked in 2008. My work dried up. And I stuck it out for a couple of years, but I just wasn't able to bring back the business that I needed to have to make me feel like I was doing anything worthwhile. And at the same time, I heard about an opening at a local corporation for in-house counsel. And I decided that was an open door I should maybe take. So I applied for that, got that position, worked there for 4 years. It was not a good fit for me. I wasn't happy, and I don't think I was being effective. So I left that company after 4 years and decided to just wing it. So I started doing independent employment investigations, incidentally, mostly for the company that I had just left, and doing contract work as a lawyer. I eventually ended up of counsel back at Trauger and Tuke, working for them, and also in the Office of General Counsel at Vanderbilt. So I was just cobbling together pieces of things that were not keeping me on a schedule, a 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 or whatever it might be.
Did you do any teaching, or was that was not part of?
No. But I was able to be a master of my own schedule. And so eventually, 5 years or so ago, I started cutting back little by little because I didn't need to work quite so much anymore. And as of 3 weeks ago, I have cut out working billable hours altogether.
That's quite an achievement. That's
I'm very happy. to be
a
there, I
sense of
think.
freedom in that,
I
isn't it? Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's bittersweet.
Right, right.
There are clients that I have loved and colleagues that I have loved, and I don't get to see them on a regular basis anymore.
What aspect of the practice of law that you have had would you put at the very top of what you have enjoyed about the practice of law?
I think one of the great things about the practice of law is that you get to do something new. Every case brings a different challenge, a different set of facts, often a different industry. And so I know a little bit about the franchising industry. I know a little bit about the restaurant industry. I know a little bit about cotton farming. I know a little bit about fluorescent light ballasts. I know a little bit about the prison industry, because those are all different kinds of clients that I've had. And that's been really cool to learn all of that. And the other thing is, again, just the great people that I've had the opportunity. But that's going to be true in any work that you do.
And you started out in your life as a teacher. And did you find any similarities between teaching and the practice of law? Any way that you found that you were perhaps not imparting knowledge, but imparting information in a way that people could learn or make decisions about?
Yes, there's a lot of teaching involved in counseling clients. You've got to be able to explain to them why they are where they are and why they can or can't get where they want to go and what the consequences would be of whatever action they're wanting to take. There's also teaching in teaching judges. One of my roles was Mike Yopp, brilliant tax attorney, but he was so brilliant that it was difficult for him to explain the position he was taking in a way that a judge who didn't do tax every day could understand. And so my job was to learn from him what the position was, and then translate it into terms that someone who doesn't practice tax every day could understand.
That's crucial.
And that was really fun. I enjoyed doing that.
There can be a disconnect, can't there, between what the lawyer knows and even the brilliance of the lawyer and the need to impart certain kinds of information that someone like a judge or a member of a jury desperately wants to have.
Right.
And being able to it's not really translate, but to put in a package. Even that's not the best of words, but to put it in a way that somebody can take who needs that information for a particular matter. What's interesting also, just as listening to you talk about the areas that you became familiar with, and that's a fascinating part about being a lawyer, that you were learning about those areas also with the filter of having to put these in a legal framework. How does this information yield an argument, perhaps, in a case? And that by itself is something, perhaps, were you conscious of that, or is this one of those wonderful evolutions of thinking as you went along, that you were able to rephrase information you received and put it into a legal context? That was kind of an odd question.
Yeah, but and that just seemed to be easy. It was, maybe it's from the years of teaching that I learned how to do that. Maybe it's partly from having loved to write all along. But being able to take an argument and translate it into a language that somebody else could understand. I was able to put myself in the position of the student and recognize where I needed to start in order to take the student along with me.
That's crucial.
Yeah.
That really is. And so many people, lay people, as they talk about the law, they think of it as very obscure, difficult to understand. And yet I think it takes a good lawyer to be able to make a legal argument that actually it has blood flowing through it.
Well, and I think it relates to I do a lot of pro bono work now. And when I meet with pro bono clients, they have often gotten themselves into a very difficult position because they didn't understand what would happen if they signed this document or they agreed to do whatever, because they don't understand how the law works and they haven't thought it through or whatever. And very often, unfortunately, there's not much I can do to help them because they did sign the document. But I can at least explain to them why they are where they are and how they can avoid getting it again in the future. And that, again, is stepping back from the purely legal argument and getting down to the everyday, what does this really mean for you? And what can you do to spot it?
I think that is the hallmark of good lawyering, to be able to do that, because people are so bewildered by the whole legal process, and bewildered by the places where they find themselves, especially a courtroom that's so different from their regular daily experience. But to be able to help someone understand what that means for them on this day.
Right.
And it's amazing how people can respond to that, to a really carefully, and it is teaching. It really is, but a carefully prepared explanation and questions that a person may have that they may have thought were just too humble to ask. But again, that's the trust part of good lawyering,
Right.
as well, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But now, what you have been in the practice of law for many years, and many more years to come. But for lawyers who would come to you now, and I believe you have a son who's a lawyer, do you know?
A brand new lawyer.
Brand new
Yes.
lawyer. For his colleagues, the people who are starting out in the practice of law, you can think back, I'm sure, on all the changes that occurred while you were practicing law, changes in technology, for example.
Yeah, I was the first lawyer in my firm to get a word processor because I begged for it.
It was a good thing, wasn't it?
was.
And many lawyers at the time perhaps didn't understand what could be done with a word processor, that you could really write better and
Yes.
think better and research and look at the changes in technology and researching that have occurred during these years. And even the law itself, there have been so many additions to laws and to statutes there are so many different kinds of new areas of law. I was just thinking about cryptocurrency, for example, which bewilders me, and I have to some point or other begin to understand it, but that's an example,
Right.
of areas. Given all of this and all that has changed, and I think the law will always be a changing domain, what advice would you give to a new lawyer now about finding herself or himself in the practice and how to start?
Oh, gosh. I don't have anything astounding or marvelous to.
Would you?
But, I mean, I think Matt's advice was good, to have an area that's yours, that you can be the expert on, so that you've always got a place to go. That's one piece of good advice. Another piece of advice that any good lawyer will give is that your integrity is more important than anything else. You've got to carefully guard your integrity and always be a straight shooter. I think that one of the changes in the Nashville bar that I have seen, regrettably, is much more aggressive and less straightforward lawyers, fewer straight shooters than there used to be. I have seen over the last number of years, more very aggressive lawyers who will twist what the lawyer on the other side says in order to get an advantage. And I think that is really unfortunate. And I would advise any lawyer not to take that route, because it's part of your integrity again. You never know who's going to be on the other side. And it might be the lawyer you're working with today who's going to be on the other side. And you want the other side always to know that they can trust you to be straight with them, and trust you to take their words at face value and not to try and twist them into something that they're not. And you expect that to be, expect to be treated that way yourself. You have the right to do that.
One of the purposes of this legal history project is to preserve the experiences of lawyers at this day and time. and what we remember about the practice of law and how it was. And I suspect that in years to come, people who will be listening to your interview that you're doing today will be listening and thinking about some of the changes, significant perhaps changes that have occurred since February 15th, 2022. But I would hope that they would also know that even though the law changes, even though the technology certainly changes like almost on a monthly basis, that there are some things that don't change, that make for a good lawyer and that make truly the court system work, right? And make it a system that's for everyone. And so what you are saying today, I think, is as important, not just on this day, but that it will be 10 years from now, 50 years from now, whenever someone is listening to this interview. Kate, I'm so thankful for your good words today. And
Mary,
so
you're wonderful.
well, I'm so honored to have had the chance to interview you, because this is something important for not just for right now, but for people to come in the future. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.